Within this video, we're going to build ourselves a custom user survey feature powered by AI.
I like that a little too much.
Instead of just giving your users a list of static questions that are going to be the same for absolutely everyone, this survey will be able to dynamically change using the power of AI. This means that any follow-up questions will be based on a user's previous answers.
Oh, it's personal.
So your AI is going to be able to adapt and create something like a dynamic survey that's going to be specific to each individual person. Now look, this tutorial is going to walk through absolutely everything you need to know. From the design, integrating with OpenAI, building out the workflows that are going to power the feature, and everything else in between. There are so many steps that we need to cover, so what I'm going to do is hand this one over to Luca, and he's going to walk you through all of these step-by-step instructions that you need to follow.
Hi everyone, it's Luca for Building with Bubble here, and today we're going to be building a interactive feedback taker for your Bubble application. So usually if you cancel a subscription or potentially receive an email for a survey by a different platform that asks you to just fill in a couple boxes, and it doesn't really get to the heart of the problem. So what we're going to be doing is using ChatGPT to allow the form to be able to ask questions based on previous responses, so you're able to get really good insights on maybe what's not working or bugs, etc. on your Bubble application. So if we demo it here, we're starting survey. As you can see, it's asking me what's the thing I wish I had on the platform. I'm just going to say a good chat. I submit that response, and as you can see, it says, what features do you want in the good chat? Maybe I can talk to it. So obviously, as you can see, we're using the ChatGPT to dynamically adjust the responses so you can really get to the heart of the problem. Would you prefer voice chat or text? Voice. And it's going to ask me a few more questions here. And I'm just going to respond to them, and then once it's gotten to the end, it's going to send us to a thank you screen. Perfect. So now it's saying thank you. Now off the back of this, you could potentially send that to your support team or to yourself, or even get ChatGPT to kind of extract the main highlights from the response and then send that as an email. But today we're just going to go through how we're going to build out this form taking element here. So for those steps, we're going to need to obviously build the actual UI, the screen, which is going to use some custom states, which is kind of like cookies that holds temporary data. And then we're going to be moving on to adding all the API keys, the completions API, which is how we're going to actually make a feedback smart. And then we're going to go in and do all the workflows to make that happen within the Bubble application. So without further ado, let's jump into our Bubble editor, and we're going to open a new page here. We'll call this survey, and we'll create a new page. So we've got a nice blank document. So first of all, let's go and set up our database. As you can see, we've only got 2 extra data types here. We've got our survey itself, which is kind of the session or the chat that we're going to be storing all the replies and previous questions, so the chat has history. And then we have the feedback, which is going to be a list of the JSON, which is the code that we're going to use to give ChatGPT the memory, the question asked, and the response. So if we start from scratch here, we'll add a survey into the data types column, and then we'll add feedbacks. Create that. Now for the surveys, the only thing or field we need to add is feedbacks, because it's going to be a list of those entries of feedbacks. So the type is going to be feedback for the field type, and then we're going to click make this field a list. We'll go to feedbacks. Going to click the JSON, which will become more clear. It's not a list. And then the question, also text, and the response or user response, also text. So all these are text, and for survey, we've got a list of feedbacks. Spelled that kind of interestingly. Okie doke. So let's go on to our design tab. So the first thing I did is I just went over to the components here. This is just a bit of UI design. I went to headers and I just dragged a header into the page. And then we're going to want to click on the page, go into layout, and instead of fixed, we're then click column, which you can see formats our header properly here. Now this is just a little bit of vanity stuff really, but you can do this to make your application look a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to click this image, I'm going to upload the building with bubble on, put it 125, and then we're good for that. Perfect. So as you can see at the moment, our page is a column, but we're going to want our feedback to come up in the center of the free bit here in the middle. So what we're going to want to do is just grab a group, untick, make it fixed width and height. We'll leave it as column, but then we'll change the container alignment to center, width and height. And that way, anything that we put in here will show up in the middle of this group. Perfect. So the next thing we're going to want to do is grab another group, put it inside this group B here. Again, center it horizontally in the middle. And so it kind of fills up a good amount of the page, but also dynamically switches between. What we're going to do is we're going to make the minimum width 80%. And we're going to make the minimum height also 80%. Actually, let's go to 60%. Perfect. So now we've got our box. So we can see this box on the page. This is going to be our large group. We're going to go to appearance and we're going to put the roundness on the corners to 20, and then we're going to add a shadow style of outset. And as you can see, that makes our group jump out nicely on the page. Perfect. So how we're actually going to display different pages, so the start page, the response and questions page, and the finish page, is we're kind of going to do it like a slideshow. So this group is going to have a custom state, and then we're going to flick through the pages using that custom state. If we go to our large group here, what we'll do is we will click I, and as you can see, we can add a new custom state. I'm going to name that page number, and the type is going to be number. I'm going to click create. The default on page load we want to be is page 1, and for now we can just leave that like that. So let's add another group into our large group here. Again, go into layout, uncheck, make fixed width and height. We'll rename this group start, and this is where this custom state can come in really handy. So we want to uncheck, make this visible on page load. Do you want to collapse it when it's hidden? We'll also do a collapse operation, do fade in and out so it looks a bit nicer. And then we'll go to our conditional tab and define the condition where when the large group's page number is 1, this element is visible. That way, our start group on page load will always be visible. And as you can see, for the next 2 pages, it will be page 2 and page 3. So that's how that is going to work. So for our first starting page, all we need is some text to tell the users what's occurring. We'll center that text on the page and then rename it start, or set the text to start survey. I'm going to make this slightly bigger, make it bold as well, and then I'm going to click on our start group and then again horizontally align it in the center and vertically align it in the center as well. Perfect. Next up, let's grab a button, pop it onto the page, click layout, center it, add 10 pixels on the top so it doesn't look so cramped. Go into appearance and let's change the label to start. Perfect. Now that is everything we need to do for our start screen. So let's check that off the list. So the next thing we need to build is the quiz screen. So to save us some time here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually click our start screen, right click, click copy, and then I'm gonna go on to the sidebar here, click on the large group, and then hit paste. By clicking on the large group, it will paste it within that group. If we were just to paste it then, it would paste within the other start group. So that's just a small tip there. Now we can hide this on the side menu, our first starter group. Now we can work on our quiz group. So let's rename it quiz. Then go to our custom state here and change that to 2. So it will be visible once we update that custom state to page 2. And the next element we need to add in is a multi-line input. I'm gonna center that in the middle. For the width, I'm just gonna uncheck make fixed width. Then I'm gonna add 20 pixels on the left and 20 pixels on the right of margin. And then probably 20 pixels margin on the top. Now we've got all the elements we need for this page, but this piece of text here, instead of saying start survey, is gonna always be the question that the ChatGPT gives us back. And again, we're gonna store that in another custom state. So let's go back to our large group here, click the eye, add another custom state. We'll name it GPT question, and this time it's gonna be text. I'm gonna click create. Default value we can leave empty. So now we've created that custom state here, we are ready to move on just after we do a couple more things. So instead of it being start survey all the time as the text, we can now insert some dynamic data, go to our large groups, GPT question, and then format as that. So now this text will always be the GPT's question. So when we send a response and the question's updated, it will show the new question. Let's rename this to give feedback. And now we're ready to format the finishing group, which is pretty easy. So again, let's copy our quiz group. We'll click our large group on the sidebar, hit paste. We'll rename it thank you page. Let's hide our quiz group so we have a bit of room to work with. And then I'm gonna go into the conditional value, change it to be visible on page 3. Then we'll delete the multi-line input, we'll delete the button, we'll go into here, clear the expression. Let's write thank you. I'm gonna start a new line, hit Control Command Space on Mac. Then I'll whack this emoji in. We'll go to the rich text editor. And we'll make it big. And we'll also center the whole thing. Perfect. So if we go to our checklist, we've done the quiz screen and we've done the finishing screen. So now the next thing we need to do is set up all the API from OpenAI. So if we open a new tab, type in OpenAI, we can find our API reference here. So if we click that, it will take us to the OpenAI documentation. Now you're going to want to log in to do this because we're going to go to the dashboard. And as you can see, we have our API keys here. Now, API keys is kind of just the password to allow you to use the API service. And we're going to be using the Bubble API connector to set up these API calls. So before we actually create this secret key, we're going to want to download the plugin or the Bubble API connector here. You do that by adding a plugin. If you type in API and hit install here, then you'll download the API connector. So we're going to want to add another API. We'll call it OpenAI. And the authentication method that OpenAI uses is a private key and header. This private key and header is actually referring to that API key. So if we go back to OpenAI, let's create a new API key, call it feedback taker, create the API key, copy it, go back to our bubble application. We've got to type in bearer space and then the API key. That's just how a lot of API keys are formatted. But let's check our documentation to see if we need any more things. So if we go to API reference here, and we go to chat, create completions, which is the API call that we're actually going to be doing today. You can see that, okay, we've got our bearer OpenAI key authentication, but we actually also need this content type application JSON. So if we copy that, add another in a shared header, which is what that H referenced here. These two H's refer to the header of the call. We can paste the key, which is content type, and the value is application JSON, which is just telling it to format it as a JSON payload. Now we've done this, we can actually have as many calls as we want, and this bit will always handle the authentication, and we don't need to do it for every single call. So for example, you can see I've got all these API calls, and we don't need to do this whole piece of coding every time we set up a new call, which is a nice feature that Bubble has. So now it's time to actually create our call instead of just the authentication for our API. And as you can see here, we've got this nice button, which is import another call from C URL, which is going to save us a bunch of time. So if we go over to our API reference again, you can see this C URL code is an example that it's given us. So we can copy that, go in, press that button and paste that in. And it's done a lot of the formatting for us. We just need to format a couple of things. Let's call this completions. Cool. We want to use it as an action. Otherwise, we won't be able to use it as an action within our workflows. Our endpoint is all good, which is the destination we're sending our payload, which will be the response from the user. Post, that's correct. As you can see, let's try to do the authentication, which we've already done. So we can just delete these two. And now we have our call. Now we could click go on this. However, we're going to want to dynamically change the response from the user and the role of the AI as well as its previous response, and also adding in the previous messages into each call so the chat has memory. So how we actually dynamically change these values in the OpenAI connector is we use an open or greater than sign and then a less than sign. So for example, if we want to make the role of the AI dynamically change between calls, we're going to delete the system. We'll call it role, and we're putting it in between the two speech marks. And as you can see, now we've got a value we can dynamically change in our calls. We're going to uncheck private, and now we're going to do the same for the role content and the user content. So again, we will click greater than sign. We'll call this GPT response less than, another greater than sign, but the other way. And then the user is always going to be user, so we can leave that there. But we are going to want to dynamically change the response from the user. So we'll call this user response. I'll change that to small s. Perfect. Now, as I said before, every time we do a call, if you were just to do this, it would almost be like you're starting a whole new conversation without giving it the memory. So obviously on ChatGPT, you're having a conversation with it, and all your other questions, which is this GPT response here, and your answers are in that chat. So we need to also create that in the back end of code, even though we're not going to be seeing that in the UX of our application. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go in above this first complete response. We're going to click enter, go in. Doesn't matter if you have any spaces, I just think it looks nice if it's all lined up. And then we're going to enter another dynamic value, which is going to be history. And now we can put in all our other full responses, which is that JSON file in the response, in here before our current message that we're sending. And now our chat has history. So let's uncheck that. And now to actually initialize the call so we can start building it into workflows, we're going to need to add all of this. So we'll just put this as system. You are a helpful assistant. Well, let's put, how can I help you today? The user response is going to be, why is the sky blue? And the history, if we actually go to our application here, we're going to want to try and find a bit of code that is going to look like the code that we're going to be creating. So if we go to dashboard, I'm just going to open it in a new tab, or docs, sorry. And we go to the chat completions. You can see here, it's given us a nice piece of code that we can use as an example of our history here. So we're going to want to go from the first curly bracket all the way to the user's curly bracket and grab that. Go in and we shall paste here and delete the comma, because we'll just add the comma in after the history here. Now, if all things go well, when we click initialize, it will come back. But as you can see, we've got an error. To provide an API key, you need to provide your API key and authorization error bearer. Okay, so let's copy this. I think we might have typed bearer wrong, or potentially we needed to do a capitalization. So let's go at the top here, paste again. Perfect. Let's hit initialize. And we've got our response here. Perfect. As you can see, within the array of choices, the message content, which is that response from the chat, has answered our question. Sky blue is blue because someone called yada 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 yada. Perfect. So let's save that. And now we're ready to work this into our Bubble application. So let's check our API keys and completions API off. So we need the starting, completions workflow, and the quiz workflow. So let's go onto our design tab. Let's open up our start tab. And if we actually quickly go back to our documentation, an important thing to have knowledge of is the different objects. So the different roles within a GPT conversation. So we've got a system, which is a optional and can be used to set the behavior of the assistant. So this is very important because this is how we're going to program the behavior of our feedback taker. And then after our first message, which is going to be actually created from the start button on our first screen, we are then going to provide all the other assistant messages in response to that as assistants. As you can see, the messages are stored as assistant responses. Perfect. So the first thing we're going to want to do when we hit this start button is create a new survey and a new response in our Bubble database. Let's create a new feedback, or a new thing, sorry. That thing's going to be feedback. And for this one, all we need to do is the JSON. And then we can create a new thing. That new thing is going to be a survey. And we can actually add that feedback that we just created here, which is going to be the result of step 1. Now, for this JSON file, as I mentioned before, it's going to be a complete completions API call. So if we go back to our plugin, we can actually just grab this curly bracket here all the way down to the user's curly bracket. If we copy that, we can paste that into our JSON here. I'm going to clear the expression. We can paste that into our JSON. So now obviously we're going to need to go back in and re-add all of the different things. But as I said before, the first thing we'll do is we'll go over to the role here, and we're going to set the first one as system, because we want to set the behavior of the assistant. And this is where this becomes quite important. The first system message, we're going to be giving it in the GPT response, and also we're going to program the same instructions into the user, just so we've done it twice. And this is where you're going to be creating the behavior. So as you can see, if I go back to my old application, we have this piece of instruction here, which is: you are a feedback taker on my website, focused on gathering insights for improvement. Start by asking what thing you wish the platform did better. Wait for the response before asking the next question. Keep your replies short and friendly. Ask up to one main question max, with 4 clarifications per question, only if needed. End with the word stop in capital letters, which is going to be our way of turning from page 2 to page 3. And it must be this word exactly. So I'm going to copy that and then go back to our build here and paste that into our GPT response here. Now, obviously, this is where if you want to ask 5 questions with only 1 clarification question, or however you want to format your specific feedback taker, whether you're using frameworks like the MOM test, for example, you can do this here. And this is where you're kind of, as I say, setting the behavior of the actual AI. So I'm going to go in and just, for the sake of making it all the same, the user response as well, I'm going to do as that. And what we created here is not the API call, we're creating the memory for the API call as our first message in the conversation. So this will come up in a long list of these different completions segments. This will be the first one, so the AI will always have the memory of all of these things, and we have it as system here. Perfect. So the next thing we want to do is, if we go to plugins, you can see we can grab our OpenAI completions call here. So we've called it completions call. So if we go to our design tab, or workflow, sorry, we can go to plugins and you can find the completions call API call. Now we have all of the things we can do, and we're just going to make it exactly the same as this call here. So system, that's correct. The response, we're going to paste that in. User response, we're going to paste that in again. But for the history, now what we can do is we can insert some dynamic data. We could just paste this feedbacks JSON in, but how we're going to be doing it for the quiz section is we're actually going to be going into our survey element, all of its feedbacks, and it's JSON, and formatting it like that. So at the moment, the only feedback we have is actually the one we just created here. So it's essentially doing the same thing as pasting that one in, but I think it's just good so we have all of those feedbacks stored under that survey that we've just created. Perfect. So now that's done, we need to set state of an element. It's going to be the large group, and we can go to page number 2. And the other element, we're going to need to format that first question that's going to appear on our quiz screen. So the value is going to be from the API call. It's from that list of choices, that array of choices, and it is that message content, and it's an array, so we can just format it as an individual thing by clicking first item. Perfect. So now we've updated our question and we've moved to page 2. Now we can start working on page 2's workflows. So let's go into our design tab. Let's get in our large group, go on the quiz. Click our feedback button and click add workflow. Perfect. So now, one thing we're going to do is we're going to create another feedback, because when we're pressing this button, you've typed your response of the question that's just been asked, and then you're sending it off for another API call, for another question, for another response. So let's create a new thing. That thing is going to be feedback. Or instead, what we can do is go onto our start button, copy, create new feedbacks, and then paste that in there. Perfect. So now we're going to want to change all of this again, which makes it really difficult with bubbles, where you've got to swipe through these things. Now, if we were to keep this as a system for the role of the GPT, it would almost be like starting a new conversation. So it would like lose its memory every single time. So as we saw in the docs earlier, we want to change this to assistant. So we're going to change it to assistant. Now I'm really bad at spelling, so let's paste the actual word assistant in there. That's perfect. Now, the response from the AI in this call is actually the previous question. It might seem like, but you're generating a whole new one, but this is generating the memory, and so we're responding from the previous question. So we go in here, take out our instructions, because now it remembers it from our previous JSON. We can insert some dynamic data and find our large group, and we've got our GPT question there. Perfect. And now, as you can see, the user's response is going to be that multi-line input's value. So let's go in, delete our instructions, insert some dynamic data, multi-line input A's value. Perfect. So the next thing to do is we need to update the survey. But as you can see, we can't grab the survey like we did in this one here, because we're not creating a new survey, so we can't access it within the result of step X kind of flow. So we're actually going to want to add another custom state, which we probably should have done earlier. So let's go to the large group, add a new custom state. That's going to be the survey. Type survey, hit create. No need to make it a list or an array. Go back to workflows. When we've updated our states and everything, now we can go in and set that state of the survey as the result of step 2. And then on our quiz screen, so the give feedback button, now we can make changes to a thing, which is going to be our survey, and that thing is going to be large groups survey. And we can add our new feedback here. Perfect. One extra thing we want to do for this one, which you didn't do in the first one, is add the question and the user response in. And that's just so if you want to easily access the whole conversation and send it as an email, then you've got that a little bit simply laid out here. So again, it's going to be the large groups GPT question, and the response is going to be the multi-line input A value. Perfect. Now let's set up our new API call. But let's, before that, actually reset the multi-line input values to blank so they can ask another question. So if we hit reset relevant inputs, that will reset the multi-line input group. Let's go back into plugins, grab our completions call. So again, we're going to want to set up exactly like how we set up this one here. So let's go assistant for the role. GPT response is the large input GPT question. User response, multi-line input value. And the history is going to be, we can do the result to survey, feedbacks, scroll down, each licensed JSON. Perfect. Now, this will keep doing this. So it will keep sending you a new reply, adding to the history, and you can just do this forever and ever and ever. And eventually, because we've programmed it to say stop, that question will be something, and then it will have stop in capitals in there. So when that happens, because that's our signal to change to page 3 of the thank you page, we need to set up a action that sets the custom state of the large group to 3 when that happens. So what we want to do is we want to click add a new action here. We can set the state of an element, and that element's going to be large groups. Page number, we're going to set it to 3. Only when the result is set for API completions, choices, message content, first item, capitalized words, contains, stop. And then that will flick to page 3. So now we've got all our cool set up. Let's actually go in and see if we have any bugs. So we're starting the survey. What is one thing you wish this platform had? A good teacher. Okay, so it didn't actually reformat our response. So if we jump in, we can see that once we've made this API call, what we should have done is also change the next question to the response of this API call here as well. So if we again set state of an element, this element is going to be the large group, and it's the GPT question. That GPT question is going to be the result of step 3's completions call, choices, message content, first item. Perfect. So let's re-preview this. A good chat. Nice. What features would you make the chat better for you? Interactive. Would you prefer interactive chat or bots? Real humans. Help on using the software. Would you prefer out through live chat, live? Thank you. There we go. Fully tested. So we have completed the start completions and the quiz workflow, as well as moving it to the third screen. Thank you very much for watching. This has been a little bit of a complicated one, but I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you're building and how this helps you within your Bubble applications. Lucas signing off here. So thank you very much for watching, and cheers.
And just like that, you've now built your very own custom survey feature, which is powered by OpenAI. As you can see, it's never been easier to create a powerful AI feature using both an integration between Bubble and OpenAI. If you found this video useful and you wanted to stay up to date with any additional Bubble resources we share, I'd always recommend hitting that subscribe button on my channel. It'll just make sure you're the first to know as soon as we drop a new tutorial. For now though, I just want to say a massive thank you for taking the time to watch this specific video, and I wish you all of the best on your own no-code journey.